our moderator is Dr. Exner-Pirot. There we are. And she's actually one of our new senior fellows that we're excited to have on board. But Heather's also a senior fellow at the Macdonald-Laurier Institute and a global fellow at the Wilson Center in Washington, D.C. And she sits on the board of the Canadian Rural Revitalization Foundation, Saskatchewan Indigenous Economic Development Network, and the Arctic Institute, and is the research advisor for the Indigenous Resource Network. She's also a longtime managing editor of the Arctic Yearbook, which I think has been a seminal piece of work that I think that she's put her heart and soul in producing something that's really important. And she also publishes regularly on energy security, Indigenous economic development, resource politics, and Arctic governance. Heather has a PhD in political science from the University of Calgary, and we're really excited to have her here and moderating this session, and I'll let her take it off from here.
Great. Well, thanks so much, Jessica, for the introduction, and thanks for accommodating myself and Erik in this virtual world. We're talking about innovation, so I guess it's apropos. We've been having discussions about this session, and beforehand had done some work on innovation and tapping remoteness. And it's something that I've been passionate about for a few years, thinking about telehealth, distance education, e-commerce, and of course, infrastructure. And I think, where we settled for this session and what we think to get out, the kind of the meat of the question is, how do we harness some of the great ideas and technologies that exist or are being developed for an Arctic context that addresses the distance, the lack of infrastructure, lack of affordability of basic goods, extreme weather and cold, new effects of climate changes, and of course the unique relationship that Northerners have with the land. And there's a whole host of things that innovation could help address or make better, be it in business, healthcare, education, resource development, energy, housing, transportation, and we heard some of the previous session addressing some of these exact same things. So it's a very good segue. And for us, there's a sense, I think, of the people of the panel, I get to introducing them, that if we could share knowledge faster and better, if we could bring engineers and innovators and entrepreneurs together in a northern context with northern practitioners, with people who understand the local context, know how to get things done in the north, know what it takes to achieve social license, that we could help solve some of those problems. There are differences between the European Arctic and the North American Arctic in some of these challenges, but we think this knowledge sharing format is very beneficial. So in this panel, we're going to hear from a number of panelists who are actually doing this work of trying to be that bridge between an innovative technology or idea and the northern context, and also the business case for that. And as we've been hearing all day, I'm sure money is a very important part of the conversation, and it has to make economic sense for all this to work as well. So I don't have quite as long of an introduction as Jessica gave myself, because we knew we would have some time limitations. But joining me today is Monica Paulsen, who's a cluster manager at the Arctic Cluster team in Norway. Thank you, Monica, for joining us. Dr. Bree Sharratt, who's a partner at Mostar Financial. And with me online here is Erik, CEO and founder of LuxuryFintech. So if I can start with each panelist to give about 3 to 5 minutes just on some of their reflections on how they're involved in Arctic innovation, how they think about the problems and the opportunities, and what they think is happening on the ground of trying to translate great ideas into actual projects and actual solutions in the Arctic. So Monica, if you don't mind, I'll start with you.
Yes, thank you. I'm very honored to be here. My work is actually matching the title of the conference very well, Tilting the Globe, Accelerating Cooperation, Innovation and Opportunity and Growth, as we say. I have been working 15 years with engineering in the process industry and heavy industry in Norway before changing and taking a step out of the comfort zone and starting to work on regional development. And the main goal was to increase growth in the Arctic region of Helgeland in northern Norway. We're just 80,000 people living in this region, but we have some heavy industries and international companies that are world-class. So it's a really exciting area to live in. And now the company I work in is Kunnskapsparken Helgeland, which is translated to Knowledge Park Helgeland. We're 20 people trying to support the local industry in innovation activities. And we do all sorts of services like cluster management, incubation services, business development, leading networks, organizing events, conferences, and so on. And we also have services for recruitment, trainee programs and such. And so I started to work with competence and innovation activities, and then we were involved in developing clusters. And we have talked about clusters earlier today, and I'm not sure that everyone has the same definition of clusters, because someone talks about clusters when companies are co-located. But we talk about clusters as you talked earlier about the pentahelix or the triple helix. Now we have evolved into the pentahelix. So we are connecting companies to the public authorities, to the universities and researchers, but also including now investors like you and entrepreneurs to have this melting pot of innovation between the actors in the partnerships in the clusters. So this has been a long road of developing ecosystems for innovation in our region. And now we are leading a large cluster called Arctic Cluster Team, which are based on process industry that produces electric power, hydroelectric power, minerals. They are processing minerals and they are making products. So we cover the whole value chain from energy and materials to products. And they have grown from an initiative of 3 companies now to 102 companies within this region, and also covering a larger geographical area of Norway, not being a regional cluster no longer. And they wanted to collaborate because these industries represents 20% of the emissions from Norway. And we have to make a change in order to fulfill the Paris Agreement for Norway. So they wanted to collaborate to find ways to reduce the carbon emissions, to reduce waste, and transform also digital transformation of the companies to be competitive. So we also entered the European scene for clusters and have been labeled the gold label for cluster management. And that makes us also more attractive for collaborating on an international level. Yeah, I think I saved the rest for later.
Perfect. Thanks so much, Monica. And we'll get into some of the ingredients that you found to be important for the success of the cluster in Norway with some of the other questions. But now I'll turn over to Bree.
Thank you. So Mostar Financial, we're an emerging venture capital firm in the process of raising for our first defense and security fund. And the objective, well, to start off, we're 100% founded by women and underrepresented minority. So diversity to us is a foundation of what we think that the fund should represent and part of our philosophy in investment. So our founding general partners have more than 50 years combined experience in the Canadian military. And so they have a specific vision and awareness of what the pain points are there. And the idea of the fund is to bridge the gap from innovation into that. But as we look more carefully at those issues, we had to bring in the idea of security, and not just the idea of security as in securing our land and air, but is really the fundamentals of security that are required, and I think play very well into all of everything people have so eloquently mentioned today, which is those fundamental building blocks that those of us in the South take for granted and that are largely missing in our northern communities. So that's, obviously to repeat, right, the infrastructure, the communication, the transportation, the housing. Those, if we look towards fulfilling those gaps in the defense, they also rely on those fundamental security. How can you build a military base in the north to defend our coast when there is nowhere to house? How do you even leverage, right? The presence of a military base can bring economic diversity and development to a community. How do you leverage that without the support of the community? So we're really looking towards what are those gaps, and we feel like there's a tipping point available right now where innovation is traditionally focused in a siloed approach. So we do health tech, and there's fintech, and there's AI, and on, right? But what we need for these fundamental problems is to bridge across the silos and find the synergies and leverage those into the solutions, bringing innovation in that way from the bottom up, as you will.
Great, thanks, Bree. And we'll probably get back to this question of what is the role of military in facilitating innovation and investment. But before we get there, I'm going to turn it over to Erik, who will give us, I think, a Danish and Greenlandic perspective to this question.
Yeah, and maybe a little bit Dutch perspective. I'm in Amsterdam, so greetings from Amsterdam. Sorry I can't be there live because I would have loved to be there live. But anyway, thanks for the introduction. Very kind. And my background, I have something in common with Monica. I mean, I work for a Norwegian group from Moderator, and I have something in common with Bree because my background was from banking and investment management. So I'm very happy to be part of this panel. And well, what I said, my background from banking got me into fintech, and from that perspective, I got introduced to a group, what I said, LNS in Norway, and they have some operations in Greenland. So I visited Greenland, and my experience in the Arctic is from Greenland, basically. Visiting Greenland 5, 6, 7 times, I sort of fell in love with it in a way. It is so pristine, the people are amazing, and the opportunities are beyond borders. And I think Greenland as such is kind of on a crossroads between Europe and the Americas, right in the middle. Americas from a geographical point of view and from a legal legislation point of view, it's more European. And Greenland sits on one of the largest deposits of rare earth minerals. But when I got there, I also saw the issues related to, okay, how do these junior mining companies survive? I mean, from an investment point of view, from a logistic point of view, infrastructure, and they all face the same issues. And also, again, relatively young government dealing with mining companies, they also had to learn. So it's about education and learning and collaborating. So we took an initiative at LNS to start a kind of conglomerate. We called it LNS Cleantech, conglomerate of junior mining companies, to start working together, sign MOUs, collaborate, what I said, simple things on logistics and staff, on infrastructure, and maybe also start creating investment structures. Because if you invest in one company, you have a certain risk. But if you invest 3 or 4 different companies, you spread your risk and you lower your risk through diversity. So I think that was the idea. And at the same time, we also know that mining industry in general doesn't always have the best reputation from what we learned from various geographies all over the world. And I think that's also where the hesitation sometimes is in Greenland. And one of the important things is the impact on the environment. And I think the idea we had as well, if we can fuel all those mining companies with renewable energy, hydro energy, etc., then I think you have a completely different proposition, which is acceptable. And from there, create this ripple effect towards the community, and Because can you imagine if all these projects come to fruition, the impact on people, on society, universities, jobs, etc., is enormous. So that's what we're doing, and we make some nice progress. So that's where my passion is at the moment.
Perfect. Thanks, Erik. Thanks, all you guys. So the first question I'm going to start with probably builds on Monica's discussion on clusters. And often a typical definition of clusters in the innovation literature will be, we have these creative clusters where ideas happen quickly and get commercialized and scaled up, and financing often at universities or in urban centers, Silicon Valleys, those kinds of things. How do we create that kind of knowledge transfer in an Arctic context, in a rural context? And what have you guys found are the barriers, and what have been the opportunities, to bring entrepreneurs, investment, northern practitioners to understand what is the need and what is the opportunity, and to eventually reach some kind of critical mass or kind of scale where an idea can become reality? And maybe I'll start with you, Monica, because this is probably something you think a lot about.
Thank you. Well, these are our everyday job to create these processes and workshops and events that foster collaboration. But the barriers are, we need to find the vision and the goals that connects the partnership into a common direction and activity. And we need to build trust between the partners. So our job is to build a partnership that have relations, good relations to one another, and that can collaborate. And then it's about infrastructure for innovation. And our cluster have worked a lot with developing infrastructure for research, for development, for testing and piloting. So not obviously for the public sector to invest in establishing research centers in the outskirts of Norway, but there the industry needs access to researchers. So we have developed research institutes and linked them to the big national institutes, which provides access to the top skilled people within the industry. And this has triggered a lot of the companies to go into innovation projects that they weren't considering before. And they also lack R&D resources within the companies. So we need some way of bridging the gap between the companies and the researchers. And this has been the role of the innovation company that I represent. So it's all about trying to find ways of working with the barriers and finding opportunities for collaboration and innovation, and speed up the processes and increase the company's engagement in projects that will lead to new opportunities. And they tend to work with core business or opportunities that lies close to core business. And our job is also to have them to explore more radical innovations and be inspired by other companies, other value chains, if so, to create innovations and commercialize on a global scale.
Thanks, Monica. And you raise an important point of the value of someone who facilitates all that, and the role of the public sector in that we'll get to. But first, Bree, you kind of epitomize that researcher, that scientist that we're trying to connect to northern problems. You're, pardon me if I'm not smart enough to get this right, but a material scientist, have a PhD in aeronautics from Stanford. Exactly the kind of person that can solve some of the technical problems. Now you're confronting the challenge of trying to implement these kinds of ideas. What are you finding are the best ways to kind of bridge those gaps, and what are the challenges you found?
So from a technology perspective, right? In a lot of the discussions today around energy, clean energy, and mining opportunities, critical mineral opportunities, well, what do you need? Well, you need good mapping, you need good land management. Oh, well, we can do that with UAVs. Oh, but wait, we don't have any, like the UAV has to land somewhere and recharge. Somebody has to, we have, and some of the investment opportunities we're looking at, there's some really awesome technologies out there where you can fly a UAV and it autonomously maps, but you know what? You have to work on a cell phone, and that requires a 5G connection. Oh, well, we don't have that. So it really comes back to the foundational infrastructure, right? So in order to leverage some of these, to leverage the technologies that will move forward and allow the entrepreneurs in the North to work together, like as the senator was talking, I think it was the senator or somebody else brought up that there's the company in Iqaluit flying the drones, right? So they already have those skills. They could grow their enterprise and go into the different sectors, the mining, the energy, land management, forest fire monitoring, all of these things. They have that. There are other technologies that are ready to be combined. But that critical barrier there is building out the communication that's required for that. It's building out some of the infrastructure. A drone, if it's small enough, it can fly pretty far. But by pretty far today, that's still under 200 kilometers. Then the North is, I don't have to tell this audience, is much larger than 200 kilometers. We need distributed infrastructure. And for that, it requires some innovation, right? So moving beyond a road to get to one place, we need mobile infrastructure with a light footprint on the environment. Yeah, we do have a company that we're working with as one of our potential investments that has a modular, self-contained infrastructure platform that they're developing. And I think to another one of Monica's points is the trust, right? The interaction, just coming into somebody's neighborhood and telling them how you can fix that. Like, well, who are you to come and talk to me, right? But this company in particular, they realize that they have a trip to the North Plant just to go and meet people. There's also, we'll get into roles of government and stuff as well, but so there's a multi-level solution, but it does start from the foundation.
Awesome. And Erik, so I wanted to ask you about how to break down those barriers, but the next question will also be about financing, attracting financing. And I think maybe that's the angle you'll be taking is how does capital find a way to attach itself in the Arctic in a way that there can be a return on investment and break down those barriers so that there is a home for that kind of capital?
No, I agree, but I do want to say something about the previous question, if you don't mind, because I think we maybe forego a little bit that there are so many initiatives. I speak again about Greenland. There's so many institutes, so many collaborations. So there's a lot happening already. But I think we should educate ourselves and to really take the opportunity to really know what is going on. And I'm sure everybody in the audience and in the panel knows, but there's so much going on already. If we are able to create those think tanks and collaborate at think tanks, I think that will help a lot. And I think, for instance, an important thing when we talk about trust from the financing sector in projects like in Greenland or the rest of the Nordics, we spoke about in Greenland about potential setting up a chamber of mines and minerals companies. And I think there's nothing like that. There's, of course, a very valuable Greenland Business Association, but there's not a chamber of mines and minerals like we see in Canada or we see in Australia. And I think that will help a lot if these companies get united and also speak as one group vis-a-vis and with the government and the other way around. And right now there's some polarization, so I think that kind of collaboration is key. And that will bring in my opinion, also more trust from the investors, but also larger mining companies. Because right now, for instance, a society in Greenland is seen as anti-mining or whatsoever. No, and Greenland is not anti-mining. No, they're very in favor of mining, but in a responsible way. So I think there's a lot to do in terms of communication from that point of view, and the Chamber of Mines and Minerals could help. And then, if those mining companies work together, what I said, a kind of conglomerate, you probably will be able to close the gap between the larger mining companies like the Anglos and the BHPs, etc., and the junior companies, because for the larger companies, it's too risky at the moment for some of the projects. So everybody's looking at it, but really not making that next step. So we need to get united from that point of view. So I think there are some barriers. Barriers of people really don't know what they talk about, or have a certain opinion about facts which they read from the newspaper. But it's getting into the facts. And again, the initiative like we're doing with LNS Cleantech to create that kind of conglomerate where you can create feeder funds into either the renewable projects, renewable energy projects, or the mining projects, that will help a lot. And that's my experience in speaking with banks and speaking with investment funds. And we also said, okay, speaking with different stakeholders, why don't we organize an investment conference in May? It could be a virtual one for Greenland, and maybe a physical one in person in September. So to get investors there, get banks there, get fund managers there, and to really experience what is going on in Greenland, what the opportunities are. It's all about communication and build bridges and create trust, mutual trust in each other.
Thanks for that. And you raise an important point. It doesn't have to be called an Arctic Innovation Cluster to be a platform to spread ideas. A chamber can do that. A conference can do that too. Exactly. And they do that. So in the interest of time, I may, throw this also to Monica and Bree, and then maybe back to you, Erik, a bit. Thinking about how to attract financing to the Arctic, what the barriers are, if you've seen some successes. And then on the other side is, what is the role of the public sector in that? And the military also, of providing either, an anchor client or customer, or provide, de-risking some of these projects. What are some of the ways that you are seeing capital flowing into the Arctic, and what are some of the ways that you're finding it to be so difficult? And Bree, maybe I'll start with you this time.
Okay. I think I'd like to speak mostly to the two things that I think the government can provide, which is, one is to act as a catalyst, and one is to act as a support. And so as a catalyst, there's lots of mechanisms that have worked well, I think, in general, which are matching programs, the idea of de-risking. So I was speaking with the nice lady from NORCAN, where they are helping to, provide a foundation, business planning assistance, to get those companies through those first few steps. I think government plays a great role in that, and setting them up for venture capital, for other private capital to come in and take them on to the next step. I think that's a great way that they can act as a catalyst. The other catalyst, and I think when Jessica's introduction was, it pointed right to it, right? The Arctic, Canada, European, or North America, European Arctic, is a fantastic testbed location. Like if you can survive, your product can survive and perform and succeed in those environments, you can kind of go anywhere, right? You're going to also have opportunities. Somebody earlier this morning talked about data centers, right? Where their big problem is cooling. Well, when it's -40, cooling is not that hard a challenge anymore, right? So can you use it as a test environment? And I think that's where the government can, in partnership with the indigenous communities, and only really in partnership, because those are the people that understand their environment. They understand what works, and critically, for any business or any new innovation, understanding what in the past has not worked. What did somebody try before and it didn't succeed, and why was that? And so they can give the direct feedback. So in the, just as an example, in the company I alluded to, they actually have one of their prototypes will go into the north and is going to be run as a test center. Because it's modular, it can accommodate. He's just saying, what do you want in it? Okay, that's what we'll put in. You take it, you run it, you live in it for 6 months, I think, or so, and you give us the feedback. And then we will base and involve the design around those specific needs. I think that's a real advantage where government can work with, the community can work with the entrepreneur to create a solution that's totally innovative. Yeah, the other one, if I can take up just a little tiny bit more time, is to act as support. And in certain cases, that is regulation, and regulation can drive innovation. I think just what I pulled up on my phone this morning, so the EU has put in place a requirement for sustainable aviation fuels. Well, I don't know what, I saw it this morning, so maybe it was announced yesterday or the day before, but now Boeing and GE have invested $100 million to develop sustainable aviation fuels. So it's regulation acting as a catalyst, right?
Yeah.
But we also sometimes regulation out of, I don't know, fear or blind spot can paint everything with the same brush, okay? So the needs around, say, UAVs, because that's what I mentioned before, the needs are around regulation for UAVs over major centers like Toronto are completely different from a regulatory perspective than what you need in the Arctic, where there's like vast distances. So if a UAV drops a 50-kilogram parcel in Toronto downtown, that's not good. We need safeguards around that, right? If it's dropped, it's not ideal, but if it's dropped, you know, between this community and this community and it hits the snow, it's not the same impact. And so to paint the same, you know, operational regulation or the whole of the Canada without addressing the specific needs of the regions actually stifles innovation. So we're missing out on technologies that are operating right now in places like Africa, where they're delivering medical supplies and food by drones, right, is like the Amazon delivery service of Africa. We're missing out on that because our regulation is waiting till things are perfect for those within 2 degrees of the 49th. So I think that's the flip side. Yeah.
I always wondered why we didn't have drones. Now I have my answer. Monica, I'll turn it over to you because, you know, again, this is where the public sector has played a role in your job of developing, you know, that cluster and having that incubation. But I'm also curious, where is the line between public support and then moving it over into the private sector, into commercialization, so that the public support doesn't paper over maybe inefficiencies, but boosts, you know, these companies provide something independent?
Yeah, well, I don't think we are risking that at the moment, but of course, the public support in Norway, we have a lot of funding schemes for, or programs for research, and then we need to make programs that also support testing and investing big money into industrialization. And we need to scale up our investments because other countries are doing so in a rapid manner. So I think we are also lacking the pre-seed capital, and this is the cluster's next mission, is to make available pre-seed capital for scale-ups and startups. And then with help of Innovation Norway, which were here earlier, they can risk reduce private investments, and we can succeed in attracting those. And I think we have the green energy, and green energy attracts companies that will be making the products for the green shift, and thus they will attract the investors that are looking for green industrial cases. So I think we'll find the big money, but we need to speed up and accelerate the innovation of and establishment of these companies. And we have established a company called Freyr, which will produce battery cells from the location in Helgeland, which is a tiny town, really, of 26,000 people, and they are building a gigafactory. And the next factory will be the Giga America factory. This will produce 1,500 jobs in the future, 600 just into this factory, and mean a lot for developing the region. And they have succeeded in finding close to $1 billion Canadian dollars from an American investor coming to Norway, visiting this small town, and actually believing that they will succeed in producing battery cells and exporting from there. Yeah. So it's possible, and I think this will be the future. More industry will look north.
Thanks, Monica, and thanks for doing the math into Canadian dollars. Yeah. Very impressive. So, Erik, you do know about big money. How do you track big money?
I think absolutely, and I think this is a very good example, because in my quest for my work for LNS in Norway, I mean, I've been speaking with a lot of stakeholders for the Nordics, and I run into a company like Fortescue. You probably Fortescue Future Industries. I mean, speaking about Greenland with them at senior level, they were extremely surprised to see what the opportunities could be when we talk about hydropower and hydrogen. Same for speaking at senior level with Ørsted. Ørsted is the Danish energy company. They're dying to sign up agreements with the junior mining companies for offtake agreements and to invest in hydropower plants. So there is so much money out there. And let's also not forget, I don't think we have mentioned it, maybe it was mentioned earlier in the conference, but the European Raw Material Alliance, ERMA, which was set up 2 years ago as an initiative of the EIB, is extremely proactive in engaging with different companies and to facilitate as matchmaker between investors and projects. So ERMA's there. Let's not forget USAID, the consul general, the consulate in Greenland, for instance. The US consulate is very, very active. We're going to see also a European representative in Greenland. And then, of course, I was also reading in December, what was it, the Sustainable Critical Minerals Alliance, which is a combination of the US and Canada and France and Germany. There's a lot of these government bodies, which Invest Canada is another one, which have a lot of money, huge amounts, but they're still trying to find a way to make it, to deploy that kind of money in the right project. So that's what I mean with the matchmaking, and I think conferences like this help a lot, but there's still a lot of, if the Fortescues of this world still wonder, okay, and just a simple guy like me telling them what the opportunities are, then I think, well, we still have a lot to do. And these are, I mean, Dr. Andrew Forrest is a very well-known person in this world, and I think in the hydro and the renewable energy sector. So if we can get these kind of guys working in our societies, with our societies, then I think we can also show the community that we can really make the difference together.
Thanks, Erik. The importance of all those bridges. I'll ask the panel one more question, and then I'll open up to the audience. Not sure how long we can go on here, Jessica. But before we go to the audience, the last question I want to talk about is with specific technologies. And I think that's one of the fun things about thinking about innovation. You know, what are those near-term technologies that can really make a difference in the Arctic, including for clean energy, including for critical mineral output? Jessica and Madeline know my favorite ones are microreactors, airships, and fiber networks. Those ones I think can make a real difference. Let's go Bree, Monica, and then Erik. What are your near-term technologies that you think can really have an impact?
Yeah, I think what it is really is not any one technology. Like, yes, it's the microreactors, but not by themselves. It's the microreactor alongside a self-contained infrastructure pod that it can be air freighted in because it is leveraging advances and reduced cost of composite materials or bio. I was just speaking with some folks in the forestry department in BC a couple of weeks ago, because they have companies that are looking for applications for biolignin composites, right? So it's taking these new innovations and clicking them together like Legos, right? Well, slightly more complicated, but putting them together and deploying them as a unit. I think that's what's most exciting for me anyway about today's technology is that I have one of my old professors, his comment was, you can do two things to get your PhD. You can invent something totally new, but there's nothing totally new, or you can put together and make something new out of what has already been invented. Do the second one. So I think that's where we need today, is to take these individual innovations and combine them.
Super. Monica, how about you?
Well, I think we have excelled in circular economy solutions. So we have come a long way reducing waste and finding new ways of utilizing byproducts. We also have come a long way when it comes to carbon capture from heavy industry and process industry. And now we are piloting in an industrial scale a carbon capture plant from the ferrosilicon industry and from limestone industry. And we need to scale these solutions and change the industry globally. We also have a lot of subsea technology that we can use, and now are developing the ocean wind solutions. And I think just the energy sector will be able to build on the competence within the Norwegian industry.
Super, thanks. And Erik, last but not least.
Yeah, well, thanks. Well, I mentioned already earlier hydrogen, and I think we all look at electric cars, the whole electrification, but it has to do with batteries. So what's the future of those batteries going to be? Are we creating a problem towards the future? So I think hydrogen is probably a way more promising source of energy than we see now. The problem with storage of hydrogen, but in the meantime, you have already these huge tankers going all over the world with hydrogen. So I think if there are solutions, and I see that basically from those big tankers, you have smaller tanks, and you can drop them off at the different settlements, you can drop them off at the mining groups, and they run their diesel engines on hydrogen. So I think that's a very simple, and that's why I mentioned Fortescue as well. And there's already innovation that you can add a little hydrogen engine kind of created to produce hydrogen, which you can mix with the diesel, and then your diesel engine runs already 50% more efficient and with 50-60% less emission of carbon dioxide. So I think these are very quick wins. That technology is there. There's a Canadian company doing that, Dinosaur. There's a US company. It's already there. So this is low-hanging fruit, which we should already do. And the other thing, I think Bree mentioned something about the data centers. But there's another industry which needs a lot of power as well, for instance, which is the lab-grown diamond industry. And the lab-grown diamond industry is not only for jewelry, but also for as a replacement in the future for silicon, for semiconductors. So that material has way more capacity than the current silicon. And I think that needs a lot of energy. But if it's -40, you need less energy. So I think there are perfect opportunities also for Greenland or the Nordics in general to have these large lab-grown diamond factories. Just an idea.
Fascinating. Thanks all. Jessica, I might rely on you in the room to help shepherd some audience questions and direct them to our panelists.
Hear me. And can you see the audience at all, or I don't know? No. Oh, okay.
They're running to the cocktails.
So you're talking into the ether, so I'm sorry about that. But Madeline has a question, so I'm going to go to her first. I'm walking. I'm walking.
Thank you, excellent panel. And I think one thing that I would like to hear a lot more of is the concept of Arctic smart cities, which actually sort of, conceptualizes and brings all together those integrated, innovative technologies that will be transformative. because what we've seen, especially in Canadian Arctic, is investments into yesterday. 10 megabits per second is not even today's goal. And so we're definitely seeing that sort of concept, I think, more in the Nordic countries or even in Greenland, where they are investing for the future, which is what we need, and to think very, very differently. So I think it's more of a concept, or rather than a question, is the investments we've made in this country are just what can we get away with, and just, there's no strategy. And without a strategy, just a pot of money in of itself, sort of that the businesses have to compete with, and then, whoever knows who gets the project may not be the most sort of strategic investment, because there's no redundancy allowed in telecommunication investment in Canada's rural remote. Well, without redundancy, that means you're vulnerable. 50-10 investments now is not adequate because it won't allow for things like, Zoom calls even, it's just too unstable. So I just wanted to sort of the visionaries are what's needed. And the other sort of thing that I want to sort of put out is our bureaucrats tend to think that the only companies that can, build innovative infrastructure is big. And we're seeing that problem in Canada is like the biggest telecommunications companies, the biggest energy companies, which actually leaves out Indigenous and Northern businesses, and they don't have to partner with us, and so they don't. And yet we're seeing government funding go that way and resulting in the worst projects or, underwhelming investments, and where the risks and harms are still borne with us because we just pay for the worst service at the highest prices, whether that's in energy, telecommunications, or in transportation.
Thanks, Madeline. Very good comments. Which one of our panelists has reactions?
Yeah, I have a couple. So I think if I look at it from the perspective of venture capital looking at seed and pre-seed money, what we're finding in certain, so there's a few different things. So one, I completely agree that we need to look definitely not backwards and not one step forward, but like 1,000 steps forward. The technology is there to leverage, and we have to, it only makes sense to leverage and encourage entrepreneurs in the community to develop their own solutions. I loved what was said earlier about focusing on the youth, and I've asked the question from a couple of our Nordic representatives of like, okay, so you have managed to establish these innovation clusters, and you have in these more not as populated communities, you have all these entrepreneurs. What are you doing at the youth level to support them and have that as part of their mindset? And how does that knowledge transfer work? I think that's a critical part of it. The other thing, though, on the flip side, is someone maybe bringing an investment where I don't live there. I need to absolutely do my homework and really form relationships and stuff, because in particular today, entrepreneurs don't just want capital, they want smart capital. So they want someone who can, bring them funds, but then also provide, some of the missing framework that will take them to reach success. Some of that is definitely hampered by a lack of strategy, right? So a lack of capital going in, which the previous panel spoke about extremely well. So I won't try to evolve that discussion. But really, like, the strategy has to be there for the investment to make sense. And that company to survive needs to grow over time. They want to employ their friends and draw people into the north to work, to live, to form community. And that all relies on that strategy. So I think that strategy is like a linchpin item that the government can go to the community and ask what the strategy should be, get the right perspectives in it, and offer that strategy really far forward-looking. That's not always well done in any community in Canada, but is particularly important here.
Thanks, and we'll go to Erik and finish with Monica.
Yeah, something what Bree said triggered me because when I started this project with LNS from Norway, I said to Frode Nielsen, my boss, I said, listen, yeah, I can fly in and out for a week every time to Greenland, but I need to understand, I need to feel the society, I need to be part of that society. So I spent 3 months, so October, November, December in Nuuk. And I can tell you, it's tough life. Sometimes it can be cold. And I know I'm speaking with a Nordic group of people, but for me, from the cozy Amsterdam, it was pretty interesting. But I can tell you that experience gave me so many ideas about how to engage with the community. But it gave me also a lot of energy about thinking about very basic innovation. And one of the things I learned was there's a huge issue with affordable housing. We spoke about it earlier. Housing is, in the previous panel, is a real issue. You have to, if you want to rent a house, it takes you 10 years to get a house allocated. If you want to buy a house in Greenland, even a small apartment is $400,000 or $500,000. So it's absolutely an issue. And of course, there's a lot of building activity going on. But we launched an initiative to start working on the famous concept of tiny houses. But tiny houses doesn't have to be really tiny, but it's the way they are constructed and put together. So there's an opportunity to build a little village of 300-400 houses in 2 months by shipping them in. But of course, we need to collaborate with all the stakeholders. But if you can pull these kind of things off, that creates also a ripple effect. And I think we can speak about growth in the Arctics, but people need to have homes. People need to be able to have affordable homes. So let's also start with those kind of basics. And of course, all the other things mentioned. But yeah, that would be my addition here to the question.
Thanks. Then we'll finish off with Monica.
Yeah. Well, I think Norway has succeeded in developing infrastructure that support living everywhere in Norway. But we see now industry is scaling up, and we need a whole different kind of infrastructure for transports of goods, for digital infrastructure, for data centers, and so on. So we haven't taken in the need for scale. So we are now we have been working 15 years to have a long-haul airport in our city, 15 years. And now to get it built, we are investing 90 million Canadian dollars from private companies within this small region, together with the public investments in the airport. And the municipality is even investing 3 times more, I think. So we are putting money on the table for having infrastructure that are a necessity for succeeding with this new industry. So sometimes we have to put in a lot of effort and also money to get the infrastructure that we need. And we just have to work harder, I guess, living in the north.
I'm sorry to say, but I'm almost relieved to hear that Norway still has some infrastructure problems. We aren't so far back. Jessica, I can only imagine that your room is ready for the next stage of the conference, so I'll end the panel and turn it over to you.
Sorry, is it okay? Sorry, it's really exciting what we're hearing, like from Norway and the Nordics, and it's it's a bit of a conundrum to translate that into the Canadian territorial context when you have extremely high energy costs, islanded grids with no connection to the outside energy world. We have very small populations or very large areas, and the barriers to innovation, it's fantastic to say that the North is a home of innovation, because it is, because we have to, because people have had to for a millennia. And the type of innovation that we're talking about here with small modular reactors, or we're talking about, having data centers, those things, there are basic needs that need to come first in order to be able to fund and house that innovation and those economies to grow. And so the North is in this place where we want to be at the epicenter of this and grow this, and are being left behind by it. So how do you bridge that gap?
Well, that's a $1 trillion question. I'll just start by saying that I think there's a real distinction to be made between rural and remote challenges in innovation, and that Norway much more faces rural challenges, and the Canadian Arctic faces remote challenges, which are different and require different solutions. But great to learn, of what's happening in the Nordics and some of the things that we can draw on. But anyways, maybe in 30 seconds or a minute less from each of the panelists, if they have any response to that question.
Well, I was thinking the same, having heard all the discussions here. In some ways, we are very, very different, but I think also, like for instance, the cluster, the companies that are in the partnership, they are located in different locations throughout Norway, from the middle of Norway up to the Finnmark region. And they have no ecosystem within their region, but they have connected through this partnership on common goals and visions and ambitions, and to work together to achieve their goals. So by building a partnership, not all physical, but within their mindset and ambitions, then we can succeed in meeting and facing those barriers and working on the ecosystem for every company.
Maybe if 1 second to add there. I think if it's about, if you want to do well, you have to do good, if you know what I mean. So that means that you have to start with the society, the community, and beneficiation is a key thing. I mean, we can go into the Arctic region, set up companies whatsoever, but what do we bring to society? And that's one of the reasons why I'm the chairman of the Pink Polar Bear Foundation. And pink comes, of course, from the red and the white from Greenland, if you mix that, and the polar bear is in the coat of arms of Greenland. But having a foundation like that, which is investing in the local community, in research, in education, especially in the young generation, the future generation, I think that's already good to start with. So giving something first, and then see how we can grow that's the ripple effect. So sorry, there was more than 1 second.
Yeah, and I won't sit here and pretend to have like the magic solution for a community that I don't live in. But I think that it starts with a dialogue and transferring at least knowledge north to south and east to west to understand solutions and how they can be translated based on what you know that your fundamental needs are. So it's leveraging and spinning of a technology. Okay, well this works for that problem. It's like the NASA model, right? Like the reason we go to space is because it ends up solving a whole bunch of solutions. Like if we hadn't gone to the moon, like you might not have an iPhone. Or if things and they provide solutions elsewhere. And so but to find the solution, you have to know what the problem is. So it's about the two-way communication. This is our problem. Oh, I might have a solution for that. And not taking a solution and going, here's your solution. And it's as my colleague Nicole likes to say, it's a square peg for a round hole, and that doesn't work. So you have to have the dialogue back and forth.
Fantastic. And I just, maybe, as I'll end it, I mean, it comes back to this kind of the chicken and the egg situation. And it comes back to, yes, but we need this kind of like, basic infrastructure. But then like, in order to build that infrastructure, we need to find ways to have capital investment. And we heard, we heard today that there is enough capital literally out there to build everything. And so it's like, one of my reasons, starting from our first conference that we had, was thinking about, well, what role, can innovation play then in some of these kind of, forward-thinking technologies when it comes to infrastructure, and maybe those kind of, innovations can help create a return on investment for a piece of infrastructure that normally would not have, like a road would not normally have a return on investment, but I don't know, you put a bunch of sensors in there, could they gather data? Could that be used, and could that data be sold? And, and I walked around asking 100 people this, and I'm like, you're a construction person, can you do that? Does that make money, but I feel like, because we're never gonna get out from this chicken and egg situation, because it's not gonna be one and then the other. And I think it goes to what Madeline is talking about. We're also in a space in the north, we're not gonna build the 1975 port, and we just, look what Africa did, 30 years ago. It's about leapfrogging, and so we're gonna leapfrog over to this new technology, and so how can we kind of how can we tap into what we need for that basic critical infrastructure that we need, and apply some of these innovations and these new things that are coming out now, and figure out like how can those create and spur a return on investment in a way that can actually then galvanize the kind of capital that we need and bring in these differences. So it's venture capital, it's long-term capital, but all of this kind of needs to come together. And I feel like we kind of have to figure out how to do it all simultaneously, instead of thinking like first we have to do this and then we're going to have to get there, because I don't think that's going to happen. But that's just my thoughts. And so this is why I think I really appreciate this panel today, and I learned a lot, and I even learned a lot also on the phone call that we had before this. And so I thank all of you, and thank you so much, Heather, for moderating. And I wish you two were here, because in person, and you can have a drink with us.
Well, cheers, I would say. Cheers.
That's perfect. So thank you all, and thank you so much for this session. So thank you.
Thank you so much.